One thing I love about summer is how easy everything feels. The days are a little more relaxed, and I find myself reaching for the same comfortable, go-anywhere pieces again and again. That's why I keep coming back to Quince. They focus on well-made essentials that naturally become those everyday staples you actually live in all season long. This ad may sound a little different because I'm recording it from Zaragoza, Spain, and I brought with me my new Quince Clubhouse golf shorts. And these are definitely going to be one of those comfortable pieces that I wear all summer. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman, so you're paying for exceptional quality, not brand markup. And it's not just clothing. Quince has become a trusted favorite for everything from home to travel to everyday essentials. Make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/traveler for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Queen Carvania stood haloed by the morning sun. An army hung on her every word.
My champions, I have sold my chariot on Carvana. 'Twas a lovely SUV, an inexplicably queenly offer. They're even coming to the castle to collect it. Tonight, we feast! An offer you can feast on. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
Amateur Traveler, episode 1004. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about canals, barges and locks, chateaux, vineyards, and aqueducts as we go cruising with European Waterways on the Briare Canal in France. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about luxury barge cruising. This is going to be another solo episode of the show, but not a solo trip. This is actually a trip that I did with my wife, and that is significant because basically the way this trip happened was my wife, who's still working for a living, I asked her, before I plan out what trips I'm going to take this year, what is it that you want to do? And the first thing she said is, it's time to get back to European Waterways and see if they will host us in Bordeaux or in Burgundy. We had done a European Waterways cruise on the Canal de Midi in southwestern France before COVID, so it's been a while, and they've been trying to get me back since then, and I wanted to get back, but it wasn't something I was going to be able to do without my wife without getting in trouble. If you asked her to summarize why she wanted to do this, probably the first thing she would tell you is 8 passengers, 5 crew, including a French chef, and really, do I have to say more? This is a luxury experience. It's just short of $10,000 per person to do this. They were paying for our fare for both my wife and me. We paid for airfare, we paid for the hotels before and after, and then we paid for the tip. The standard tip they recommend is 10%. They do have bigger boats that hold 12 passengers, and those, the fare is about 2/3 as much. So if you have more people, you pay less money. You can also rent out an entire boat. And again, when I said we did this through European Waterways, and European Waterways owns a number of boats, including this boat, which is the Renaissance. And then they also act as a marketing organization for some boats that they don't own, although that's a smaller number than it was when we last traveled with them. And these are luxury hotel barges. And the first time I did this, the word barge really set the wrong expectation for my wife. Because while this was originally a barge for hauling goods, in 1997 it was converted into a luxury hotel barge. And what that means is there are 2 decks in this boat. In the main deck, there is a dining room, a living room area, and then outside another dining area, a hot tub. And then in front of that, there is a galley for the French chef, who is wonderful and has been true on both the cruises we've done with them. The pilot's in front of that, and the crew quarters are in front of that. The whole total length of this boat is 120 28 feet or 39 meters, and the total width is about 16 and a half feet or 5.1 meters. And the reason why it is that size is that is the size of the locks on the Briare Canal. This is the maximum size boat you can fit on this canal. Last time we had toured on the Canal de Midi, which is the oldest of the canals in France. The Briare Canal is the second oldest, although much of the canal has been rebuilt in the 1800s from the original canal in the 1600s. And so what we were seeing was predominantly the locks from the 1800s. And so we had one place, for instance, we could look up and see the old locks, but that was not the ones we were using. Downstairs on the Renaissance, there are 4 cabins for up to 8 guests, and they're all good-sized cabins with private ensuite bathrooms, as you would expect. And then the 5 crew that you have with you in this particular boat, the captain acts as the tour guide, and that was Craig. Craig is English, but grew up in France. The pilot is Luc, also English. The chef was Thomas, spelled Thomas, who is French. And the hostesses were Robin and Danny, who were from Ireland and South Africa. I'm going to talk more about the shipboard experiences, but first I want to talk about the itinerary of what we did. Along the side of the canal, there are towpaths. This is where the animals used to pull the boats down the canal. Now they are bike paths or trails. And 15 years ago, if you'd taken one of these cruises, you would really mainly spend your time inside the boat or walking alongside the canal. But they've changed it so that you now do activities every day. In addition to the experience of just the relaxing cruising down the canal and walking under avenues of gorgeous plane trees, you also have experiences where you go out and visit different things in the countryside. Their emphasis is not the sort of things that you knew about anyway. So, for instance, at one point we drove past the large palace of Fontainebleau, and that's something you can do on your own. So they don't do that. They do more hidden and unique experiences where you're not doing things with a crowd of people. You don't go very fast on a canal boat. You're usually getting on or off at a lock, and you can usually walk to the next lock before the boat finishes going through the lock and makes it there. If you were to get in the car and drive the distance that you cover in a week, it would take you about 45 minutes to get from end to end. You only sail during the day. There really isn't provisions to do it at night, nor would you want to. You're in the beautiful French countryside. The trip starts in Paris. The meetup point for this cruise, as well as a lot of the European Waterway cruises in the area, is the Hotel Westminster in Paris. You can certainly stay there. We did not. We met the group there, hopped in a van, met the other 6 people we would be traveling with, and drove a couple hours out to the town of Montargis. And I apologize in advance for my high school French here. The entire route that we went was from Montargis. Montargis is about 15 miles outside of Burgundy in the province of Loire. And we cruised from there down to Château-sur-Loire. If this sounds familiar, that's because we did cover this itinerary before in episode 840. The Briare Canal connects the Loire and the Seine, and it was built starting in 1604. It was hand dug by between 6,000 and 12,000 laborers, depending on what time period. It took almost 40 years to build. The other interesting thing is when they built this, canals were still a relatively new thing in France. And so they actually had to bring troops to protect the workers from the local nobles who were having land confiscated for the canal and did not want this canal to be built. Now, by the time they come back in the 1800s and they upgrade the canal, everybody knows that the canal is good for business, but they didn't know that in the early 1600s. So Henry IV of France builds this in order to develop the grain trade. He's trying to reduce food shortages. He's trying to make it easier to move goods from one place to another. And obviously the rivers are how you're generally moving your trade, but this allows you to skip from one set of rivers to another. So we started in Montargis. Montargis is a beautiful little town. We didn't get a chance to see it on the way in. We actually came back to Montargis because we were there in the weekend and a lot of things would have been closed. But it's an old walled town. Little Venice is one of its nicknames. There is an Eiffel iron pedestrian bridge that goes over the canal in the very first mile of the canal, one of 131 bridges in the town. And Montargis is a 4-flower town. Now, I was not familiar with this system. We've talked about the prettiest villages of France, the Plus Beau Village de France awards that small villages can get. This is not that, although it's somewhat related. You can apply for a rating based on the beauty of your public gardens. And they go from 1 to 4. Maybe there's a 5 somewhere, but Craig wasn't sure that he'd ever seen a 5. And this means that if you walk around Montargis, which we would get a chance to do later, you're going to see a lot of flowers, and it's quite a pretty town. One of the interesting things is we drew a crowd as we were getting out of town because this, as I mentioned, is a big boat that is completely filling the locks that it's in. I mean, from side to side, from stern to bow, it is just the size of the locks and not much else. And only 2 to 3 big boats a week go through these canals. And so it's a tourist attraction. Basically, as we're going through the locks, a crowd is gathering because it's the weekend in Montargis. And we're off on what Craig called a really fast, slow-paced trip. The first day, you don't do any other side excursions. And so you're really getting a chance to enjoy the locks. It's interesting, in this particular canal, they no longer have lock keepers at each canal lock. You can still see the lock keepers' houses because that's the way it was before, each house with a date for when it was built. But there are people who are assigned to us who are driving from lock to help us out. Luke also has a remote that he can operate some of these locks remotely. The Renaissance also has vehicles that we're going to be using to go out and do excursions. And so Craig, for instance, at one point, as we're going along this canal, while Luke is driving us down the canal, he's going to hop out and hop on one of the bikes that's available on the boat and pedal back to town so he can drive the van to where we're going to stop for the night and meet us there so that we're ready to go for the next day for the excursions. The towpaths, most places are paved, and this is all part of a larger bike route that goes through much of Europe. And so if you wanted to, you could do much of this canal on a bike, and it would be a very pleasant experience because, of course, it's very flat. Because even the locks, when you're in the lock, they change maybe 8-10 feet per lock. They've chosen a route through here that has a minimum amount of ups and downs. You do on the Briare Canal, first sail up the locks for about half a week, and then you start going down the locks as you get to your maximum elevation about Wednesday of the trip. So speaking of locks, just to give you a little idea of what's going on here. So if you're going uphill, as we were for the first half of the week, you get into the lock and the ground level is 8 to 10 feet above you. And so if you want to get off at the lock, you have to wait for the boat to get in, the gates to close, and then it will fill up with water. You will slowly rise up to the level of the canal. And when the deck is the same level as the canal, you hop off through one of the gates on the left or the right, and then it will continue to rise up a couple more feet. The boat basically goes not only from the whole left to right, front to back, but the depth of this boat is made to fit in the canal. I think there was one time in the trip we heard it drag a little bit on the bottom. So your cabins are basically, the floor of your cabin is below the water line. You can't open the portholes in your cabin while you're cruising because they're just above the water line. So you get off at the lock when appropriate, and then you basically know from the maps or from talking to the crew how far it is to the next lock if you're going to walk or if you're going to bike down there, and then you'll meet the boat and hop back on at some appropriate lock in the future. The only other thing we had left to do the first day was the first of our meals. Now, I'm not going to tell you what we had for dinner every time, but this was the first one. Our first course was fresh cheese and zucchini cannolis, herbs and balsamic. Wonderful. One of my favorite of first courses that we had the whole week. And then duck fillet, roasted potatoes, grilled turnips, and cherry jus. And then a cheese tray, usually 3 different kinds of French cheeses. This time was Tome de Brebis Bleu d'Auvergne, and Camembert. I would say most of the time I had no idea what these cheeses were. Camembert was one I knew. And then there's usually white and red wine. And so it wasn't until we got further on the week that we started saying, well, maybe I'll skip that first course, or maybe I'll save and have that cheese course for breakfast in the morning, because there's just plenty of food. And maybe I don't need 2 wines with dinner, but they were always available. It is an open bar on the ship, and so cocktails are available during the afternoon. After your excursions, you're quite often handed a cocktail when you get back, although later on in the week, probably because we chose some of the cocktails we were handed were alcohol-free, but there's always an open bar and 2 kinds of wine with both lunch and dinner. On Monday, we cruised in the afternoon, and then we did the first of our real excursions, and that was out to a castle. The first day we cruised to Amélie, and the second day we cruised to Montbui. And in Montbui, we hopped off and got in the van after lunch, and we visited the privately owned Château de la Bussière. And this is the fisherman's castle. That's literally what it means. And it is still privately owned by the family that owned this castle even before the revolution. Out on the countryside, not all of the nobles were evicted or stayed evicted. Some could buy back into their castles later on. And so this family has lived there for years. They've opened up this castle so that you can tour part of it, including the grounds that had a very large dovecot. And when I say very large, it could hold 1,000 different doves. And the rule of thumb was for every hectare of land you had 1 dove. And so this was a large castle with large lands. There's still a decent-sized garden, and there's a moat around this castle, which made for some great photography because you could see the castle that was reflected in the moat. Around the rest of the castle, there's still a dry moat. The noble who had the castle would also have been the local judge. And one of the judgments that you could get against you, if it wasn't a capital case, but it was a very serious case, would be to clean out the dovecot for like a year. And that is almost like a death sentence, because the amount of ammonia and such that you're going to be exposed to for cleaning up the droppings of these doves, these 1,000 doves for a year, is probably going to wreck your health if you're going to make it through. And if you didn't know why this was the castle of the fishermen, once you go inside the castle, which we're not allowed to take pictures inside the castle, you're allowed to take them outside, there are fishing supplies and fish and nets and rods and reels everywhere. Clearly, someone in this castle historically was a great big fan of fishing. And upstairs in the castle, they have rooms set up the way they would be historically. There was a room, for instance, with all these different types of irons where you're putting them in the fire, or you're leaning them up against the metal stove, or you're putting coals in them, and then clothes that would be ironed with this. So that would be a servant's quarters. So a real fun experience there. And again, not a castle that you would know about, and not really on the major tourist route. As we're going through this, there's 2 or 3 other people here. But a fun experience for our first real outing.
You may have heard about Built as the loyalty program that lets you earn points on rent wherever you live. Well, they just leveled up even more. As of 2026, homeowners can also earn up to 1.25x points on their mortgage payments. This is thanks to Built's 3 new credit cards, the Palladium Card, Obsidian Card, and Blue Card. All 3 turn your housing payments, rent or mortgage, into flexible rewards, so you can choose the card that fits your lifestyle without missing out on points and exclusive benefits. Built points can be redeemed at top airlines and hotels, Amazon.com purchases, future rent payments, and more. Built points have also been ranked by top publications as the industry's most valuable point currency. Your housing payment is already your biggest expense. Make it your most rewarding. Find the card that fits your lifestyle and apply today at joinbuilt.com/traveler. That's joinbilt.com/traveler. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Terms and limitations apply. Subject to approval and eligibility, Built cards are issued by Column NA, member FDIC, pursuant to license from MasterCard International, Incorporated.
You've heard me talk about OneSkin before, and whether you're someone who tries every new skincare product that hits the market, or you've been using the same thing or two things for years, at some point, most of us realize our skin just isn't keeping up with the way it used to. As we age, some skin cells stop functioning the way they should. Longevity scientists call them zombie cells, and they're a major driver of visible signs of aging. And with summer here, that matters even more because up to 80% of visible skin aging is linked to sun exposure. That's why OneSkin's new limited edition summer bundles have you covered. They pair OneSkin's skincare essentials with SPF products, so the OS1 peptide can help address the visible signs of UV aging, while SPF helps protect against future damage. It's a complete system to help summer-proof your skin, so be sure to check out the summer bundles before they're gone. I'm spending more time these days thinking about skincare and about sun protection. Born from over a decade of longevity research, OneSkin is helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off code TRAVELER at oneskin.co/traveler. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code TRAVELER. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support this show and tell them I sent you. And thanks to OneSkin for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. And before breakfast, I should say that one of the traditions that Craig has is that every day he's going to go out and get fresh bread from a local bakery. And so there's always a bakery somewhere nearby, although not as many bakeries made it through both COVID and then more recently last year's rise in the price of fuel because of the war in the Middle East drove a number of bakeries out of business in France because bakeries obviously use a lot of fuel, and the public is fairly price sensitive to how much a baguette costs. A baguette is expected to be around €1, and if it gets much more than that, people have a hard time accepting that. And so a lot of bakeries got caught in that crunch and went out of business. And so sometimes Craig might have to go 2 towns over to get the baguettes and the other pastries that we're going to have for breakfast. But if you're up early, he invited everybody to join him to do the outing to the bakery, which was fun. I think I did it every time that it was available to us to join him. And it was fun to see the little bakeries, to see another town that we may not really stop in. And then he gave a treat to those who joined him on the breakfast run. So after breakfast on Tuesday, we went back to Montargis because this was the day that things were going to be open. And again, we hadn't gotten that far, so it didn't take that long to get there in the van. We made a real quick picture stop on the way to see a Roman theater, or what was the remains of a Roman theater just sitting in some farmer's field. They can't plow it up because it is historic, and so it just sits there. The first thing we did in Montargis is we visited a factory, which is the Mazet factory, M-A-Z-E-T, and that is a place that makes pralines. They were given a royal license to make pralines, and this family has been doing it for many years, back before chocolate was a thing. And we had a chance to make a Paris-Brest. And a Paris-Brest is a circular dessert made to look like a bicycle wheel because it was made to commemorate the Paris-Brest Paris bicycle race in 1891. And this is a show pastry with a praline flavored cream and flaked almonds. And so we put on our hairnets and our aprons and had a chance to learn how to make one of these. Pastry had already been made, and so we were putting in the cream with a pastry bag and placing the candied hazelnuts on the top and such. And the bonus was that we got to eat it, but then we had a chance to try all of the different praline desserts that they have. It was a stunning amount of praline desserts that we got to try. I think there were at least a dozen different types, including ones that had chocolate. They had ones with salt. They had ones with rose flavored and mint and all sorts of different ones. It was a dirty, thankless job to be able to try them all, but I managed to do it. I think some gave up partway through. The shop is a gorgeous little shop. They still have the office of I think the father of the person who runs it now, that's still set up as if he were about to come back from lunch and get back down to work, because now the office is moved out to their factory, which is outside of town. We also toured the local cathedral, which is a beautiful cathedral. It has newer style stained glass. So the original style of stained glass in a lot of churches in France would be each individual piece of glass is a different color, but then later on they started painting on the glass, and this is the style you'd see in this cathedral, which can get much more detailed. And I actually like this style of stained glass. This had one of the only pieces of stained glass I have ever seen with a samurai warrior in it. It was depicting a visit by Francis Xavier, one of the founding members of the Jesuits, to Japan. Most of the windows told regular Bible stories because that was how you communicated them to a mostly illiterate audience. There was another stained glass that showed the king who is arriving into town with Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc is apparently depicted in many different churches. There is some historic accuracy that she was in Montargis. The other thing that Craig pointed out, and this is something I didn't know, do you know about the Green Man in French churches? Inside many churches in both England and France, you'll find a green man. It's a decorative figure found in medieval churches and some other buildings maybe. It's a human face surrounded by leaves with foliage growing from its mouth, nose, and eyes. It's often interpreted as a symbol of nature, fertility, rebirth, and some people think that it may be a survival of pre-Christian pagan traditions, though I understand historians are cautious about that explanation. But it is hidden in a lot of churches. And so this was the first church we went to where Craig lifted up one of the seats in the choir stall, and there enough, there was this strange little green man. Green not because it was color green, but because it was this foliage that is being represented on this wood carving in this case. We had some time to wander around Montargis, had a chance to hit an ATM because traditionally tips are done in cash and we didn't want to bring that much with us to Europe, so we hit up a number of ATMs along the way. And then we also went to the Fisherman's Quarter, and this is the oldest part of the city filled with half-timbered houses, and really got a chance to see why this is a flower town, because within some of the canals here, there were rowboats filled with flowers, and there were flower baskets on bridges, and quite a beautiful town, especially that Fisherman's Quarter. I would highly recommend getting over to that area. And it's right off the canal, right off the Briare Canal. That afternoon, we cruised from Montbui to Rosny-les-Sept-Éclus, and that is Rosny of the Seven Locks. And so I mentioned that you could still see some of the old locks on the canal, and this is the place where you can. They took these set of 7 locks that went up the hill in Rosny, and they lighted up at night as now a national monument that remembers the original canal. So this is 350 years old and is no longer in use, no longer filled with water. We walked up there in the evening to see it lit up. As we were cruising up to Rosny, we had a little accompaniment because a jazz trio came on board the barge and entertained us as we were cruising up the canal and through the locks, which was a wonderful little treat. They were singing predominantly in French, but jazz is one of those international things. That was Tuesday. We started on Wednesday with a lovely walking tour of Marais-sur-Loing, and it's associated with the painter Alfred Sisley, but this is a beautiful walled town, one of the more beautiful towns that we saw. It still has an old grist mill in it. It still has 2 of its original towers, and its washerwoman walkway along the outside of the walls. If you're coming in to the town through the main gate and you look off to your left, that's the washerwoman walkway there, but there's also a recording of the floods through various years over the last 200 years and how far up the floodwaters have gotten into this town. We toured the church in the town, spotting yet another green man. This town has long been associated with Suc d'Orange, or barley sugar candy. Apparently, the Benedictine monks created this candy. It's a boiled sugar from barley. Some of the members of the group bought some at a local confectionery shop and handed it out. This goes back to the 1600s, and it was surprisingly good. I mean, I don't normally think of barley and being a confection that you would enjoy, but another chance to walk through an old walled town. I will say at this particular stop, we did see one tour bus. So, so we sometimes saw other tourists, but really that was about it. One of the things that's nice about the church in Moret-sur-Loing is that they have a map there of what portions of the church were built at what time period. And so number of these churches, you wonder, why were they built with no plaza in front? Well, several of them were, but then as the church expanded, it expanded into that plaza. And so now they're surrounded by buildings. And you could see that here as they'd drawn what was built in what century. And of course, all of these churches have been works in progress where they were built literally over centuries as the needs of the town changed. And then we had a very unusual stop, which was an unexpected highlight for me, I'd have to say. I wasn't really familiar with the French painter Rosa Bonheur, but she was someone who painted mostly animals, and probably one of her best known works is hanging in the Met in New York City, and that's the Horse Fair. And this is a 8-foot tall, 16.5-foot wide painting of a number of horses and riders going down a tree-lined street. And with a lot of her works, the emphasis is really on the horses and their movement and such. And this was a very successful painting for her. She was not one of these artists who starved in her lifetime. When she sold that painting, she bought a chateau, and that is where we visited, the Chateau Rosa Bonheur. She did not get married. She did not have kids. She had a acquired family. Later in her life, a woman and her very successful daughters moved in with her, and part of the deal was that they would carry on her legacy. They would write her memoir, and they basically cared for this chateau for a couple generations. She died in 1999. They preserved her studio as if she were to walk back in and start working on things. There's still a mannequin in one corner from a piece that she was working on. There's still an unfinished painting, and there are numerous works that she did that were in progress or that were study of how this animal might sit or look or move, that then were incorporated into her other works. Her studio is just filled with paintings and with heads of animals, some of which lived on her land. She had a lion on her land, and some of her most interesting and I'd say beautiful paintings were of this lion. And so very realistic because she had one, and she had deer and all sorts of other animals. And so she is, again, known for that painting of animals. She's somewhat eclipsed in the 20th century by the work of the Impressionists, for whom she was a contemporary, but she did not paint in that style. And so she became less well known. And eventually that family sold the chateau to a mother and two daughters and a semi-adopted daughter who have restored this into a museum, are still working on restoring it. You can also eat lunch in the cafe there. You don't have to be part of a European Waterways tour to go there, but this is something that European Waterways is promoting. And we had lunch there with one of the daughters who is now working on preserving, or they're still going through the attic, finding pictures, talking about the whole process of how this house was considered important by the French government, but not for this painter. They would have just as soon taken all the paintings outside and thrown them into the rubbish, but because it was done by a well-known architect. And so now they're taking some of her works, and there are shows going on. She's already has a painting hanging at the Musée d'Orsay, so she's not unknown. And yet the French government didn't appreciate it. It took years for them to buy this house, and they put a lot of love and care into restoring it. So very interesting stop at the Chateau of Rosa Bonheur, and I know much more about her than I did previously. Oh, another painting that she is well known for is a painting of Buffalo Bill Cody on horseback. They met while he was in Europe and started a friendship. So she's a remarkable woman whose legacy is being cared for by a series of remarkable women. Got back in the Renaissance and we sailed up the canal past the Seven Locks. While we were on these cruises and we'd cruise for a few hours, it's just a really relaxing time on the boat. It's a good time to get off and pick your walk, depending on how far apart the next set of locks are. And this was a particularly good stretch to go for a walk, but I was also using it to do some blogging or do some work as others were using it to catch up on a book that they'd brought along with them. This is a tour that is a relaxing pace, and it's something that we knew and something we were looking forward to. And then on Wednesday, as I said, one of the reasons this is a nice place for a walk is there are a series of reservoirs up here. These are the reservoirs that feed the canal. The canal can also take water to and from the rivers at the end, but this is the high point of the canal. So we have been climbing up the canal at this point, and now we're about to start going down the other side toward the Loire. And we cruised that day to La Gazon. We did a morning cruise the next day from La Gazon to Briare, and this is the Briare Canal, and so this is really close then to the end of where we're going to go. And Briare is best known for the bridge that goes over the Loire River. So you're in a canal, but the canal goes over the river. So there was a bridge that was built. They call it Gustave Eiffel's magical aqueduct, but he didn't really build it. He wasn't involved in this at all, but his company was involved in part of the construction of the bridge, but this was designed and built by other people. But everybody wants to claim Eiffel, and that will be a highlight of this trip, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Are you the type of person who has always been deep into travel research, saving hotels, building itineraries, sending recommendations to friends, and at some point you thought to yourself, why am I not getting paid for this? That's where Fora comes in. Fora is a modern travel agency designed for people who want to turn their passion for travel planning into a real business. Fora's tech, training, and community give you everything you need to start earning. With a network of over 7,000 preferred travel partners, Fora gives you the ability to offer clients VIP perks like upgrades, resort credits, and late checkout, helping you deliver standout experiences and build a business people come back to. It's time you turn your passion for travel into a business with Fora. Become a Fora advisor today at foratravel.com/traveler. That's FORA travel.com/traveler. And make sure you tell them we sent you, foratravel.com/traveler. And thanks to Fora for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
There are things in life you don't want to be transparent, like your swimsuit or your search history. But when it comes to your wireless bill, transparency is everything. That's why Mint Mobile's wireless plans have no gimmicks and no gotchas. Just high-speed data and reliable coverage on the T-Mobile 5G network. And right now, all plans are $15 per month, even unlimited. And that's one of the reasons I was looking into Mint Mobile even before they approached me about being a sponsor. Because I was transitioning from high tech to being a travel journalist and wanted to save money on my monthly bills. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's it. There's no catch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months, plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy, including up to 20 gigabyte hotspot. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com for more information. And thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Instead, at this point, we're going to head out to Sancerre. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sancerre, but this is an area that is a premium white wine. So Sancerre is a wine region in France. It is a hilltop wine town and a number of towns around it. They're particularly known for a white wine made from Sauvignon Blanc. And Sauvignon Blanc is not my favorite wine. It tends to be not as flavorful as some. Interestingly enough, because fewer people are drinking wine and fewer people are drinking alcohol now, we have seen this really impact the wine industry. In Napa and in Bordeaux, for instance, they are ripping out vineyards to put in orchards or something else because there is a decline in wine consumption, especially among younger people. But it is more heavily hitting the heavy red wines. And so Sancerre, for instance, is doing fine. And some of the other lighter French white wines are also doing okay, such as Chablis. But we had a chance to go out and visit this wine region. Now, we were introduced to this wine, I would say 40 years ago by friends. And so I knew it was a wine I liked, but I'd never been to the region. So we had a chance to go out and visit a vineyard. Specifically, we were visiting the vineyard of Upper Loire. And as with this episode or any episode where I'm trying to speak French, it is very useful to remember that in the show notes of this episode at amateurtraveler.com or in the lyrics of this episode, wherever you got it, are the names of all of these things that I'm either pronouncing or trying to pronounce, as well as links, for instance, in this case, to the winery that I'm talking about here, the Upper Loire. And we had a chance to visit this with the owner of the winery, who took us up on top of the hill where we could see the different topology of the area. Some of the vineyards are these incredibly steep slopes that go up the hill, going up above the town. And those are some of the oldest and some of the most valuable grapes. There are three different types of soil in this region. There's terre blanche, which is white earth, which is clay and limestone. The white earth is similar to the soil of Chablis, which is nearby. And there's caillotte, small stones, and limestone. That's going to make a different type of wine, a lighter, fruitier wine. And then there's flint. And so this is going to be something, as you go down towards the Loire River, that has cut down to some areas that have flint soil, and that's going to be a more minerally wine. And so you can see from this spot here up the hill all the different regions with the different types of soil. It's not a very big area, but it produces at least 3 different terroirs because of the geology of the region. We had a tour of the production facilities, and I've toured numerous wineries, but I was picking up some information at this one that I hadn't really caught on before, because in this cellar, they have oak barrels and they have stainless steel, and they also have cement, big wine barrels made out of cement. And which ones they use depends a bit on what the weather was like that year. So, for instance, in 2023 was a perfect year, a very balanced year. They had just the right amount of body in the wine as well as the right acidity. And so for that one, they're just going to put it in stainless steel because they don't need the wine to change at all. And stainless steel doesn't react with the wine, and so you get out of it pretty much what you put into it. 2024, however, was a wet year, and they had a lot more acidity, and they need more body, so you'd put that in oak to get more body in the wine. And then with 2025, which is a hot year, it had too much body, and you needed a little more acidity, and you put that into the cement, because the cement, unlike the stainless steel, actually breathes more. It has more oxygen can get into it, which will change the wine. And so how you make the wine depends on the weather. The problem they've got is they've got a lot more hot years this year. And this looks like this is going to be yet another one as I look at the weather that's going on in France. And with global climate change, that is affecting what wines can be grown in what places. And we'll see what difference that makes in these classic wine regions. They may even have to start making different wines, which would be a difficult thing for them to do because vines take a while till they produce. One of the interesting things we learned while we were in the town of Sancerre, there was a little tiny car that we saw, and Craig said, "Oh, I hate those little cars." And it's a car that has such a small engine, almost like a motorcycle engine. I don't know if you've seen these little tiny cars when you've been in France, but apparently there's a loophole in French law that you don't need a license to drive this kind of car. And so you can drive it if you're 14 or older, and you can drive it if you didn't pass your driver's license because you weren't capable, or you can drive it if you lost your license. And so he really tries to take a wide berth over a driver who is driving one of those little tiny cars. And I did not know that, and I might have to do that as well. After the tour of the winery, we had a chance to try some wines. If you get a chance to buy wine, it is much cheaper if you buy it in France. Obviously, it doesn't have the import fee, and it also doesn't have, these days, the tariffs on it. But of course, you'd need to have a way to bring them back in your suitcase. Doesn't work as well for me with only using carry-on luggage. And then we went up to the town of Sancerre and had a little bit of time to wander around and do a little shopping in that very pretty little town. And it is a tiny town. There really aren't that many streets. That night, we walked over to this canal bridge. It is lit up at night, and so there are lights along this bridge. It used to be the longest canal bridge in the world, the longest bridge where a canal is going over something else. It is now the second longest because Germany has built a new bridge and for one of their canals. But it's quite beautiful. It was built with style in mind, not just function. And the town of Briare is a pretty little town. We had a chance the next morning to go down to the farmer's market and explore the town a little bit more. The church is under renovation when we were there, but it has some beautiful tile work, some mural work on the outside of the church. Look up the top of the church. There's a lovely angel there that's done in tile. And then that morning, we cruised over the river in the canal bridge. And this being some of the culmination of this trip when you're going in this direction, Craig brought out a bottle of champagne and a saber, and sabered a bottle of champagne that we had along the trip. He also taught at least one other member of the group how to saber a bottle of champagne. It took two bottles to do it correctly. The first one broke in a fashion that we were not going to be drinking from. And that afternoon, after we finished going over the bridge, we got a cooking demonstration from Thomas. He was making some lobster ravioli, and people got a chance to get their hands in and help with that. And then was also making some chocolate spheres that he was going to be using to fill with ice cream for the dessert that evening. And I have videos up on my Instagram. My Instagram is Chris2X, of both of those cooking demonstrations if you're interested in what kind of things you would learn if you took this cruise. And then that afternoon, we went over to the Château de Ratelet. And this is a beautiful old chateau. Construction started in 1270, but the reason why we went, this is now a private art center. And so we had a chance to watch a pottery demonstration and see some of the other art that was on display there. There were different groups that come in for retreats in the area. There was a choir there when we were there. We also had a chance to visit yet another dovecot, and in this case, it was a little smaller than the other one, but it's a round tower like the first one that we saw. In this case, they have a long ladder that spins around a central axis that would allow you to get to the different dove eggs in the tower. So it's hard to believe because this is hundreds of years old, this ladder, and it's still working here. So some good construction. Some world-class potters have come to do their work at this studio because sometimes they fire up the wood oven. So most pottery studios are using natural gas-fired ovens, but a wood oven, because of the ash, will actually change the pottery in interesting ways. And it's not easy to fire up a wood oven because it takes a lot of wood for one thing. It takes about 15 hours to get to the 1,300 degrees Celsius that you need to fire the pottery, and about 2 days for it to cool down. And over 1,000 degrees Celsius, you can only put in oak wood. And apparently, you're putting in the wood, and it is just pretty much instantaneously consumed, and so it takes a lot of wood, so they only do it once or twice a year. But it was interesting to see some of these pieces by a Japanese potter who had come there for that reason. Beautiful little preserved castle here. And this area of Burgundy, we're in Burgundy at this point, is so remote that it really didn't get paved roads until 1960s. And so it's a beautiful countryside area here. That evening, we had the captain's dinner with Craig and cocktails with the crew. And then the next morning, it was time to go. It was time to get back in the van and head back to Paris to the same hotel where we got picked up in the first place. As I start to head towards wrapping up this episode, I do need to do a shout out to our fellow passengers, John and Vicky, Eric and Kathleen, Blake and Karen. They made the trip a lot more fun. We had so much fun together that there was talk of a mutiny. What if we just didn't get off the boat? But your traveling companions can make a big difference. And two of these couples were together, but the rest of us just didn't know each other at all. But we bonded over adventures, good food, and good wine. Couple logistics about the boat in your stateroom. It can be configured either with 2 single beds or with 1 double bed, them put together. There's a towel rack in the bathroom, which is a heated towel rack, which was useful for me because this was the first week of a 3.5-week trip. And so I was washing out clothes and drying it on the towel rack as we went along. There's also a water bottle and a hat and a European Waterways bag in your room for you, as well as a few other tchotchkes. There is an LCD panel in the room. I honestly never turned it on. There are DVDs and a DVD player that you can borrow upstairs, as well as some books that you can borrow in the library there, including some travel books and some regular reading books. I do mention upstairs, and I'd say this tour does require some mobility, both just to get up and down the stairs of the boat, but also some of the stops that you're going to make, some of the excursions. It wasn't like we did 10,000 steps necessarily on this tour unless we wanted to, but some mobility necessary. The cabins are air-conditioned, and that would make a bigger difference if you went later in the season. If you went in the middle of the heat of the summer like they're doing right now, you're going to need that air conditioning both inside the cabins as well as in the inside area upstairs. We didn't need it as much for the time that we went. We had cool and a little bit rainy weather, so judge accordingly what time period makes sense for you. Both the dining room as well as the outside dining area seat 8 because there are 8 passengers on this boat, although you can pull up an extra chair for the captain's dinner. The outside area has some additional seating, lounge chairs, as well as I mentioned the hot tub. You can sit in the hot tub and watch the canal go by. I had a chance to use it at least once on the cruise. Every day as you get up or the night before, you'll see both the schedule on the chalkboard, and then there's a separate chalkboard which has what the meals are going to be, so what you're going to be eating for lunch and for dinner for that day. There are life jackets on the barge, but because of the size of the canal and the boat literally can't sink. If it were to take on all the water it could, you'd need to go upstairs and you could sit and drink champagne while you waited for whatever needed to happen because you would still be out of the water. Also in the inside area are a couple different seating areas. There's a table where you could work on your journal, for instance, if that's what you're doing. There's a couple couches where you can sit and read your book. One thing that was new on this sailing versus when I was on the Enchanté and the Canal de Midi is that there is now Starlink on board. And so there was good connectivity most places, especially in this direction. In the other direction, there's sometimes when we were told you would have spotty connectivity on one day because of the plane trees by the side of the canal. I also travel in this particular trip with a Holofly eSIM, which is an unlimited eSIM. Not all of you need unlimited connectivity when you're traveling, but for me, it's a business expense and it's only about $3 a day. So that's one of the things that I'm using these days. One interesting thing on being on a canal that was built in the 1600s is it was built by people who most people didn't get more than 8 miles from their home during their entire lifetime. While we think of it as not traveling all that far, it would have been quite far for them. One interesting tidbit about the finances of the boat we learned from Craig is that if he goes 10% over his budget, he does not get in trouble, but if he goes 5% under, he does. Or at least he has to explain it to make sure that he's still providing the experience they expect. And lastly, I really need to give a nod to the crew because it's really the crew that makes this kind of trip. Craig, the captain, Thomas, our chef, Luke, our pilot, and you can join Luke as you're going down the canal and learn more about piloting the boat if you were so inclined. And then Robin and Danny, who are our hostesses. And I think by the end of the week, they'd been invited to everybody's home to visit if they were to come to the U.S., because you develop that kind of relationship as you're doing this intimate kind of cruise. If you go to my socials, like Chris2X at Instagram, you can see the video walkthrough that I did of the boat, so you can get an idea of what it really looks like. And then I'll have a blog post up that will also have pictures of this trip, and that should come out just before this episode comes out. So it should be up by the time you hear this. Getting to some of the wrap-up questions that we usually ask. First of all, who is this trip for? It is a relaxed trip. It is not an inexpensive trip. So you need to have the funds to do it, you need to have the time to do it, and you need to have a sense of both adventure, but also be able to chill out a little bit and relax into your vacation. If I'm standing in the prettiest spot, where am I standing? What am I looking at? That's tough. I love a good castle. So standing in front of any of the castles would easily be on my list, but I'm going to have to say standing on the hills in Sancerre and that just beautiful wine region with the grapes all around us was probably, I think, the prettiest spot. One thing that makes me laugh and say only on a European Waterways barge cruise. I think the talk of mutiny definitely made me laugh. Just the point at which you don't want this to end is a pretty nice way to end a trip. And if I had to summarize the trip in 3 words, I would say chef, locks, and history, because you're just going through this wonderfully historic, picturesque, beautiful region of France. And that was my European Waterways trip. And thanks to European Waterways for inviting me on this trip.
This summer, say I do.
I am marrying a stranger.
Like never before.
Am I crazy?
It's a whole new Married at First Sight on Peacock.
Thank God I woke up in love.
With new experts.
My name is Dr. Lisa.
My name is Paul Brunson.
More couples.
This could be the start of a very successful marriage.
And more surprises.
Or maybe not.
Everything is just not enough.
You're a little bit crazy.
I don't know what's gonna happen. I want my fairy tale ending.
Married at First Sight, streaming July 12th, only on Peacock.
Ever wonder where Tropicana got its name? The tropics. And every time you enjoy a glass, you're not just drinking juice, you're taking a trip. Stepping into sunshine and embarking on a flavorful journey into the tropics where ripe fruit is crafted into wildly delicious juice. And the best part? No passport required. Tropicana. Give life some juice.
A special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, you can learn more at patreon.com/amateurtraveler. And thanks to Jill, who became the latest patron of the show. Thanks, Jill. I heard recently from Aaron about the episode we did on Delaware. Hi, Chris. I've been listening to your podcast for many years now. I love it. Wanted to respond to your excellent Delaware episode. I did something unique in Wilmington last year. There's a wooden tall ship called Kalmar Nickel, when she is homeported in Wilmington, for about $50, you can get access to the grounds where she is docked, the Maritime Museum there, and then ride on the actual ship, including opportunities to pull on the ropes to raise and lower sails. I thought I'd let you and your listeners know. Sincerely, Aaron. Thanks, Aaron, and that is very timely for me. I think when this episode comes out, I will be on my way to a tall ship in Maine, a Windjammer cruise in Maine, and you'll hear more about that in the future. If you want to travel with me, there are still spaces available on the Bolivia trip in May of 2027. One of you sent me an email or a message somewhere asking if there were openings, and I lost the email, so I haven't responded. So this is my response. Yes, please do sign up. Go to amateurtraveler.com/trips or drop me an email to learn more. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays, and just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes, they put you on hold, your doctor doesn't take your plan, game over. We see you, so we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc, search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly, no cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.